wow, WordPress got to a third of the web when it was truly unusable for most users. I really see that there are a lot of legs there. And again, the bets that we're placing and the investments that we're making is to make that even more approachable to really just, someone who would otherwise maybe just make a Facebook page for their business, like make it approachable for that person.
Let's discover the Cleveland entrepreneurial ecosystem. We are telling the stories of its entrepreneurs and those supporting them. Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I had the pleasure of speaking with Artur Grabowski. Artur emigrated from Poland to the Cleveland area at the age of 8, where he later attended Case Western Reserve University and got exposure working both with a hardware measurement instruments company and a Silicon Valley software startup that later became a unicorn. Artur then transitioned to the business world, working with KeyBank's investment banking team here in Cleveland and with the startup ecosystem while at Silicon Valley Bank in the Bay Area. After completing an MBA at the University of Chicago, Artur returned to San Francisco to join Adobe, where he led acquisitions and investment and launched Adobe's early stage investments through the Fund for Design. Artur then returned to Cleveland and joined Automattic, the company behind WordPress.com, to lead their acquisitions, investments, and strategic initiatives. Most recently in 2019, and where we will spend most of our conversation today, Artur left Automattic to co-found Extendify, where they are on a mission to help web hosting companies deliver delightful WordPress experiences, and has since raised venture capital in support of this mission, with the initial investment led by Village Global and subsequent investment from a variety of angel and strategic investors, including his former company, Automattic. WordPress powers an almost unbelievable 43% of websites on the internet today, and Artur is set on supporting those in this Goliath ecosystem. Artur has really great perspective on the landscape of the internet, building a fully remote company before it was the popular thing to do so, on venture capital, and I feel he has a refreshing and unique take on many aspects of the whole entrepreneurial journey overall. So please enjoy my conversation with Artur Grabowski. Sometimes there are these facts that you come across that are like so profoundly shocking that they're hard to believe, and then they're hard to stop thinking about. And one of those is one that I came across in preparing for our conversation today. And it is just like the absolute dominance of WordPress on the internet. And especially because, I didn't know this. I have a feeling most people do not know about this at all. And I feel like that may be as good of a place as any to start, kind of through the arc of your career, your path to Automattic, which I also think most people probably don't know about, and how that kind of sets the stage for the work you're doing today with Extendify.
Yeah, definitely. I'll give the short version of the arc up to Automattic, and then we can circle back on any of it if it's interesting. But
yeah.
Yes, I attended Case undergrad. I spent a few years working on various tech projects in technical roles and enjoyed that. But I was working with a startup in California called Melodis, later now known as SoundHound, and got to do some early user acquisition. You'd call it kind of growth hacking nowadays. And it was really fun. And so I made this hard pivot into the business world. And I spent several years there working in Cleveland here at KeyBank. I moved out west and joined Silicon Valley Bank. And eventually, after graduate school, went back to California and joined Adobe Systems and kind of did the full Silicon Valley thing. It was a lot of fun. I learned a ton. But eventually, my wife and I decided to move back to Cleveland. This is kind of 2017, 2018-ish. Mm-hmm. And as part of that, I wanted to stay in tech, stay in software, but live in Cleveland. And I had known from my time at Adobe about Automattic, the company. And Automattic, spelled with 2 T's at the end, which is kind of, it throws everyone off, is the company, kind of loosely it's described as the company behind WordPress. And WordPress is what you were referring to there with this super surprising statistic, which is today it powers 43% of the world's websites.
Yeah, it's crazy.
which was only a few years ago. That was 34%. And so that market
Wow.
share is not only massive, it's growing. And if you actually just look at websites that use some sort of content management system, which content management system, short is CMS, it's the tool for authoring, managing, and publishing content to the web. If you just look at websites that use some sort of CMS, that market share is over 60% for WordPress. So really, it is this dominant software. And it's an open source project. And Automattic is kind of the main contributor to the open source project. The co-founder of WordPress is the CEO of Automattic. And so I found myself at Automattic. It's one of those, you mentioned the statistic is surprising. And what you realize once you really dive into it, though, is a lot of people that use WordPress. And the reason it has grown to be so big is because when someone wants to start a website, they'll ask their friend, their uncle, their whoever, hey, I want a website, what should I use? Nowadays people do use Wix and Shopify and Squarespace, but still the dominant answer is WordPress just because of the critical mass of it and the momentum is in that direction. But the other really cool thing about Automattic was it was from the very beginning a completely distributed organization. And that really was reflective of it being a company behind an open source project. Many open source software projects have contributors around the world. They're sort of people working wherever and contributing their time to build this software. And because the people working on WordPress early on were distributed, Matt Mullenweg, the CEO of Automattic, thought, hey, let's just keep it that way and let's just hire people wherever. And so at the time that I joined Automattic in 2018, it was, call it 700-ish, 800-ish people in over 60 countries. So really then you think a couple of years later when COVID happened and all the kind of work from home stuff happened, a lot of people came to Automattic, came to me and my co-founder in Extendify asking like, how do you do this? Like, how do you go distributed? How do you work from home?
Doing it before it was cool.
Before it was cool, that's right. So anyway, that was certainly another transformational part of my career was experiencing that distributed work. But yeah, eventually, so that precipitated the kind of idea behind Extendify and us leaving Automattic to start building Extendify.
So what was the nature of the work that you were doing at Automattic?
Yeah, so Automattic was, at kind of 800 or so people, a relatively mature organization, but nonetheless, it was a large technical organization, large support organization, but there was still a lot of opportunity on the business side of things to grow both the organic and inorganic side of that business. And so my role there was, my title was Director of Corporate Development, but I'm not sure that really means anything to anyone. But really what I was doing was a combination of kind of internal strategy and operations work around everything from pricing to new products to business model questions, as well as acquisitions and investments. And so so I led some acquisitions of companies within the WordPress ecosystem as well as outside. Probably the best known company was Tumblr. We acquired Tumblr from Verizon Media, which had been part of the Yahoo acquisition. So that's sort of a lot of history there. And then also investments, kind of early stage venture investments, again, inside and outside of the WordPress ecosystem. And the combination of the sort of outward looking part of my work there and getting to spend quite a bit of time with Matt, who was both the CEO of the company, but more importantly, the leader of the open source project, just gave us a lot of insights about what's going on in the ecosystem. And frankly, I don't know if low-hanging fruit is the right description or just maybe some not best-in-class operations around the ecosystem where a lot of people had lifestyle businesses, a lot of people were doing things in kind of an open source manner that was, worked well in that ecosystem. But when you compared what some of those software companies were doing in WordPress to what's going on in Silicon Valley, for example, you realize that, hey, for something that powers over a third of the internet, like there should be more investment here. There should be more companies of scale. And it just really wasn't. It was a lot of kind of hobbyists and kind of small 1 and 2 person shops building stuff in WordPress.
So just on that point, because I'm kind of fascinated by this, and again, it's just from the kind of enormity of the statistic. Like, how is WordPress and Automattic? I don't know if this is the right word, but like under branded. Why is there this dearth of understanding of like the reality of these organizations, that Automattic even exists, and the sheer presence of WordPress on the internet.
Yeah. It's interesting because despite the number of people that use WordPress, if I just ask someone where would they go to build their website,
Yeah.
usually they'll give an answer, like they'll name a closed platform like Wix or Shopify, or they'll sometimes name a host like GoDaddy. They'll say, "Oh, I would just go to GoDaddy, buy my domain name," and they have something to build a website. And part of the problem there is that WordPress itself is not a company. WordPress itself does not have a marketing budget, and really the brand awareness, brand building, all that happens through all of the stakeholders individually rather than by one single behemoth that has 43% market share. When you think about the different business models that are common in open source, you have the sort of, and over the years this has developed in what's most in favor, but you've had historically kind of the services-based model where people will start using open source software, and then you'll have some sort of professional services organization come and implement that or provide some customization. You have sort of the add-on business model where there's a core piece of technology and then people sell kind of premium pro add-ons to that. And then you have kind of the managed services business model where essentially you have companies offering hosting, for lack of a better description. And that applies not just to web hosting, but to other types of hosting. Like, for example, you may have some open source big data storage or analysis technology. The core technology is open source, but you still need to store that somewhere. You still need massive kind of server volume, etc. WordPress, primarily the biggest business model historically has been that managed hosting business model. And so really, when you think about who is driving and deriving the most value from the ecosystem, it is the web host. It is the GoDaddies, the Bluehost. Automattic itself is primarily a web host. And so each of these hosts individually is marketing WordPress, but really they're trying to market their flavor of WordPress because they are also competing against the other WordPress hosts. And so you have this, it's not quite like infighting, but you have this competition that instead of everyone marketing together against Wix or marketing together against Shopify, they're all just kind of marketing and trying to acquire users, the same users who are trying to build this online store or some sort of blog or whatever. And that definitely takes away from that brand awareness as you're describing it. And I think the core project has tried to have a chief marketing officer before, a CMO, and it hasn't worked. And I think that's still a work in progress. How does the marketing side of this come together?
So in your role at Automattic, it seems like that maybe would have been the best place for you to get an understanding of what are the problems that folks are experiencing within this larger ecosystem. And so maybe as we make our way towards Extendify and the work you're doing, I mean, for one, more on the entrepreneurial motivation side, is that something that always, resonated with you as something you wanted to do, something, you wanted to try and build something? And then, more in the context of the problem that ultimately you're trying to solve here, how did that start to come to be?
Yeah, I feel like as so many people, everyone's got their list of ideas of, here, 20 different startups, 20 different products I could build. That was certainly always on my mind. I had the opportunity early on to work on some early stage stuff I alluded to earlier, kind of Bay Area tech, and I enjoyed that. I also always viewed entrepreneurship as kind of a means, not an end in of itself. And so I always thought, if the best way for me to accomplish my current goal is by starting something, I'll do that. But if it's joining something that exists, I'll take that path instead. And so I was not on a path to just start something so that I could say I started something. Not to say there's anything wrong with that, especially now I realize how much I've learned by going down this path, that I think there's just value in starting something for the sake of going through the experience. But for me, it was definitely going to be whenever I found the right opportunity. And I'd say what at Automattic, as you sort of described there, it was this chance to see the dynamics of the WordPress ecosystem, see what how a web host worked specifically. Get to meet with a lot of stakeholders outside the company just because of my role. I was talking with folks about acquisitions and investments and such. And I'd say the biggest kind of aha moment for me and my co-founder was also at Automattic, was when we realized how high the failure rate was for WordPress users. Despite how big it is, how large the installed base is, the fact that it's still growing, many, maybe most users fail when they first try to get started.
What does fail mean?
You look at their website when their subscription is about to renew, it still says hello world, and they're contacting support to cancel the subscription.
Got it. Okay.
It just literally didn't get anywhere.
Yeah.
And I had very hands-on experience with this because one of the really cool things Automattic does is no matter what your role is in the company, everyone does customer support the first 2 or 3, I think 2 weeks when you first start, and then a week every year you do customer support. Whether you're the CFO or an engineer or a marketer, it doesn't matter. So we would see this, like we would see users fail. And then we started talking with other folks outside of Automattic and realized that this wasn't anything particular to Automattic. If anything, actually, Automattic did a better job than everyone else because Automattic had some of its own added tools for its WordPress hosting. And that was this clear moment for us where we saw there was a big user experience problem. It is meaningfully hurting unit economics for WordPress hosts and is also depressing the addressable market for other software developers within WordPress, where you have companies building tools for WordPress and they're kind of maxing out the size of their business in the kind of maybe tens of millions of dollars. Whereas in other ecosystems like Shopify, you have businesses with hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. And so we really saw a few of these dynamics that came together, and it just felt right to a degree that it hadn't with prior ideas that I'd explored. There was just enough key insights here, we felt like, that it seemed like we just had to go and do something about it.
So what does going to do something about it look like?
Yeah. And I think as is almost necessary for anyone on the entrepreneurial journey, it has evolved. And the core kind of mission or vision has been consistent around how do we make these users successful? How do we make hosts in the WordPress ecosystem successful? And in doing this, keep users within WordPress, more money gets reinvested into WordPress, the whole ecosystem continues to grow. So that has remained unchanged. I'd say our view has evolved on the importance of add-on tools versus the core onboarding, the initial experience of getting started with WordPress. Essentially, our view has moved as to where users fail, how early they fail. The more we've dug into it, the more we've realized they fail earlier and earlier. So whereas early on, we thought once a user got to a certain point, they were lacking some tools that are present in other ecosystems, like a Shopify ecosystem. They're not present in WordPress. So let's offer those tools. We realized that users fail much before that. Users fail on the first time, we don't kind of have a visual here, we're just talking, but if I showed you what the WordPress dashboard looks like, the first time someone signed up for hosting, they bought their domain, they sign up for their hosting plan, they get dropped into WordPress, and the first reaction you hear from people when you do some user testing with them is, oh, so I have to do this myself. And at that moment, people have to decide, am I going to pick up a new hobby, watching YouTube videos on the weekend and figuring out how to become a junior web developer, or am I just going to go use Wix? And what we realized is that point where users fail is much earlier. We have to catch users before they hit that wall and really get them started down the right path. And that's the reason that in the end, we decided that our true partner and customer is the web host, because that is who we can work with to get this world-class experience in front of a user before they hit that wall.
So that's kind of fascinating in that on the flip side of the coin, if you look at people who are succeeding in WordPress, does that mean they are succeeding in spite of, how are so many people succeeding then?
Yeah. So they have a surplus of resources, those resources being either time or the money to hire someone to help them. And so if someone is really just, if someone is just hustling, trying to get their business going, whatever it may be, maybe they sell cookies, or maybe they have a laundromat, or maybe they're, whatever, and they just want to get a website started.
Yeah.
When they hit that wall, they quit. Now, if someone has the time, has the resources to work on this, this is their priority, they already have a business going, they're trying to add another marketing channel, etc., those folks do fine. They figure out a way to get it done. But really what this highlights for you, though, and with high the churn rates are, and we hear from some of the hosting partners that they lose more than half their users in their first year. So fewer than half users are returning or renewing their subscription. What that makes you realize is if WordPress is still growing despite retention numbers that are that poor, it means WordPress can easily double. And really, when Matt, the kind of leader of the WordPress project, talks about WordPress, his ambition is for WordPress to power 85-90% of the web. And if we fix the retention problem, that's completely feasible.
Wow, that's exciting. So kind of grounded in, I don't know, what you would call an onboarding problem. That's really the crux of the inspiration here. How do you begin to start to tackle that problem? Like how did you approach it? What does an MVP look like? What were you first trying to validate as you take on what is really an enormous problem in the context of the internet at large then?
Yeah. Onboarding is a term that we use ourselves internally, but we also know that it's misleading because what we're doing is we're building products that also live with the user throughout their journey with WordPress. So it's a term we use ourselves, even though it only represents part of what we do. But the first part we built of our product, I don't want to get into too many of the technical details of WordPress itself, but essentially when we started working on this, there was a new kind of editing experience within WordPress. It was very nascent. A lot of people didn't know what to do with it. And we built a set of tools on top of WordPress to make that easier to use for most users. And that was part of how we proved out kind of the approach we were taking to design, to how we help people create content, create pages, bring new content to their sites. And was also an opportunity for us to build out some of the systems that power what we're doing. So Extendify is a SaaS offering. It is connected into WordPress, but is a standalone offering where we generate designs, we generate content, and we bring all these smarts to a user's website. So building this first component, and we called it the library, kind of a library of templates and designs, that gave us sort of a good starting point for how we built the technology and how we prove that users find value in making WordPress easier. From there, we then expanded on the same kind of technology stack to build really that sort of onboarding piece. And what was so amazing was we went to this hosting conference in Europe where we met with dozens and dozens of web hosts before the onboarding piece was built. And so we had one product in market. It was, probably had tens of thousands of monthly active users at that point. And we went to talk to hosts. Hey, we're going to leverage what we've built, what we're using. Lots of people are finding value in this. We're going to leverage this to build this experience for you, for the web host. And every single host said, yeah, let's do it. Like that's our problem. And so so we told them all, this doesn't exist. Like this is like, cool. This has been like a great conference for us, but like we haven't actually built it yet. So that's what we then kind of went back and did is build that experience. And really we built that last year, and last year started shipping that to hosting partners. And it's been amazing to actually get that live on web hosts around the world at this point who are onboarding users. And when those users hit WordPress, the first thing they see is not this super clunky ancient WordPress dashboard. They see Extendify. And we brand it with our host so that it is an extension of the host experience. And by the time that user gets to WordPress, they have a functioning website, and it takes them like 90 seconds to do. It's just complete kind of night and day difference relative to users who are just starting with vanilla WordPress and trying to figure out themselves.
I mean, it sounds like the proof is in that pudding then.
Yeah.
which is very exciting. So the path to realize that, to develop the product, maybe just give us an overview of, what the company looks like today. You had to raise some capital, you had to build out the team. What was kind of the history and evolution of the company, kind of in parallel to the product vision?
We raised money initially in March of 2020, which was essentially, we raised money within a week of the country shutting down with COVID. And it was this very funny dynamic where we started fundraising. It was just an idea. We didn't have any product. There was no code written. We were fundraising. Luckily, my co-founder and I both had sort of experience and access to funds and angel investors and folks. And in most cases, or I'll step back, we had decided from the very beginning we were going to follow the WordPress and Automattic model of building a distributed team. If we're working in the WordPress ecosystem, the people we were going to hire are going to be all over the place. They're used to working remotely. It's just going to be easier. It's going to give us access to more talent. Just everything about it. It's going to be more straightforward and also less expensive, at least to a certain degree. I mean, I think there's increasingly kind of compensation parity around the world. And so when we went to talk with investors, some investors always are obviously just not interested. It's not a fit for them. But we were running into investors who would say, yeah, I like the idea, but this distributed thing, this is never going to take off. It's so funny to think about retrospectively, but at the moment, I didn't blame them, right? It was still relatively, you would hear about a few companies like Automattic or Basecamp, or there's a handful of these larger examples, but we couldn't really blame them. And the way we really connected with our initial lead investors, Village Global was one of them. Andwayne there has been amazing. Mike Leventhal is another early investor, just a really well-known investor from Mayfield Fund back in the day. And for them, it was like a plus. So we weren't trying to convince them on why this distributed thing was like okay. For them, it was, oh, that's awesome. Like, you guys can take advantage of this sort of labor supply, all this stuff, and you've done it at Automattic at scale. You know how it works. Perfect. Yeah. Like, this is a competitive advantage. And that just really resonated. There was such a different tone of conversation for us versus trying to sell people on this model. And then, as it happens, once you kind of raise your initial money, everyone else kind of says, okay, well, I guess other people are okay with this. So that's, we're okay with it too. But yeah, it wasn't obvious. And we were also, again, we were fundraising essentially off an idea, which also has its own challenges. But we use that funding to largely hire. I mean, our approach has always been to acquire users in a very efficient way, capital efficient way. And so when our initial product that we released, that was sort of our testing ground and our way to build technology, we distributed that by integrating it with other relevant products. And so we weren't doing paid click ads or whatever, paying directly for user acquisition. We were doing that through a more kind of product integration, product distribution strategy. And similarly now, when we're looking at distribution through our hosting partners around the world, this is kind of a relationship-based sales effort, partnership effort, where we go and reach out to those customers. We're not spending tons of money on user acquisition there. And so really we've been able to be quite capital efficient and really spend our money on hiring awesome people.
So just to help, I think, set the stage a little bit in terms of what the market looks like here. And I also don't fully grasp this yet, so I think it would just be good to get that perspective. But is your competitor, how do you think about competition? Because solely you are operating within the world of WordPress, right? It's not like helping onboarding for Squarespace or Shopify, where they probably have similar, maybe not at the same scale, but some kind of onboarding problem as well, right? So this is a play for WordPress, just to start, right?
Yes, correct. Well, I'll expand on just one bit of that. You're right in what you said. I'll just expand on one element. we've talked to a lot of companies, including large public software companies that have tried to reach the WordPress ecosystem with their products, and they can't because it's this open source. It's a really tough nut to crack. And so these companies talk with us about using us to reach the WordPress ecosystem with their products. So we are onboarding people to WordPress, but that doesn't mean that we're just onboarding them with WordPress solutions. We're going to onboard them with whatever the best solution is for them to run their small, medium business online. And so the platform will be WordPress, but they may use MailChimp or they might use whatever other tools to get their job done.
Got it. Okay, that is helpful. And so how do you think about competition then, right? Mm-hmm. Like what does that even look like?
Yeah, just like one kind of funny anecdote from our fundraising journey is at some point we were talking with an investor and she asked us, how are you going to make sure that the new user growth in WordPress is going to continue relative to a Wix or Shopify? And my answer was, I don't care. That's not my problem. WordPress is 43% of the web. Last month it was 42. The month before that it was 41. This isn't a problem I have to solve. That's not my problem. My problem is, how do we make these users successful? And so one of the cool things is, I don't really care what's going on in Wix or Squarespace or whatever.
Yeah.
Our competition in most cases is against this status quo of a really choppy experience, but one that some people are just used to. And so it's like, okay, I know this is hard, but it's just like what we've done for the last 20 years. WordPress turns 20 this year. We view our kind of target market as essentially every web host. There are thousands of them. As essentially every web host, there are a handful, and I really do mean a handful, like single-digit hosts who are trying to do what we're doing just for themselves. And so they are building a better onboarding experience, but not something that is accessible to other web hosts or that they're opening up to the community or anything like that. They're just trying to make their own version of WordPress better. So they are a competitor to us in terms of just us selling to them directly. So they have like an internal product team that's building a competitor to Extendify just for their own hosting. We don't care that much about that. Now, we think our product is better and eventually they'll adopt ours anyway once the sort of like they see the numbers. But whether or not that happens, that competition is limited to sort of their own slice of the pie. And this really kind of, I don't know if it's a helpful metaphor, but this kind of metaphor I use is that every web host out there views WordPress as this pie, and they cut out their own slice of their pie, and that is how they make their money. They have their own, 1% or 2% or whatever of the WordPress ecosystem. For Extendify, we are a host agnostic solution. We don't have our own hosting. We never want to be our own host. Our goal is to be this kind of like delicious frosting on top of the entire pie. Like, we just want to make WordPress better for every host. And in doing so, also grow the pie, because a lot of the partners that we work with, their growth has slowed, right? Competition is stronger from other hosts or whatever. And because the retention rate is low, they spend a lot of money on customer acquisition. A lot of those users leave and the host doesn't grow. We help those hosts reignite their growth by making sure those users that they're paying to acquire actually stick around, spend more money on hosting, and build successful businesses there. Anyway, so the competition really is, we just think about the WordPress ecosystem, and within the WordPress ecosystem, we really are just showing people why the default, what they've been accustomed to for 20 years or so, is hurting them, and why there's a better option.
Got it. This makes sense. So perhaps even though it is not your problem, do you have a perspective? You mentioned Matt's thinking like 80%, but like on the longevity of WordPress dominance. And I don't know, I always find myself coming back to this Jim's Barksdale quote that there are like two ways to make money. One of them is bundling and one of them is unbundling.
Yeah.
And it's just like a pendulum that swings back and forth. And it's still I don't know, I'm very caught on the like dominance of WordPress and how that probably creates this attack vector for the Shopifys and the Squarespaces and the Webflows and whatever comes next to, like, shoot to carve their own space of the internet out away from WordPress. How do you think about this? You're tied to a platform, and the platform risk, I guess, is the general term there.
Yeah. I'll answer the second part just because it's easier, and then come back to the first part of the question. The platform risk is another thing that often was on our minds early on, and is something that also came up when we were fundraising quite a bit. I often thought back to probably 2010-ish, plus or minus. You had tons of companies being built on top of Facebook, specifically gaming companies. And then one day, Facebook changed some dynamics in how those marketplaces and APIs and everything worked, and these businesses essentially disappeared overnight. True platform risk, right? Like there's some sort of gatekeeper there, and if they close the gate, the business is done. What was really important to us from the beginning is, even though we were building on top of a platform, because it's open source, there is no gate to close. So a given partner, a given host could say, we don't want to work with you. And that's fine with us. We don't have to work with any specific partner. But even when that happens, even if a specific hosting partner doesn't want to work with us, their users can still choose to work with us. Like that, because WordPress is open source, the flexibility at the end of the day just lies in the user's decisions, and rather than a centralized company that can make some change to fundamentally disrupt a business that is built on top of WordPress. The question of the market share and competition from outside, it's real. There for sure are lots of companies trying to take that market share. There's a big business opportunity there. And historically, if you look at some of the numbers, even though Wix's market share has been much smaller, they've done a better job of monetizing the users that they have. And so there's a real opportunity there for other businesses to come in. It may be a case of being short-sighted and not seeing some sort of disruption coming. But when I look at WordPress right now, the critical mass of not just the hosting companies that are distributed around the world, right? Like every country has lots of little hosting companies that are acquiring users in those geographies, but also all the service providers. There's so many freelancers and agencies that if someone wants to build a site, they come to a local agency and they say, hey, I want a website. Most likely that agency is going to say, oh, let's use WordPress. That's what we know. That's what we've always used. That I think there is enough of that critical mass there that it really would be hard to change the direction of this in the near term. And what's been so shocking for me is until 2018, the website editing experience within WordPress was the equivalent of building a website in a note-taking tool. There's no ability to add layout, structure, real media elements to a website. It was really just like a text editor. It was terrible. And so people had to install lots of add-on functionality to make WordPress usable. And nonetheless, WordPress grew to, at that point, around 35% of the web. Since then, WordPress has released a brand new editing experience, a block-based editing experience, that has grown now WordPress to 43% of the web. And that experience is getting so much better. Like it is to the point where it is maybe on parity with a Wix now and going to exceed it. And so when I think about, wow, WordPress got to a third of the web when it was truly unusable for most users, I really see that there are a lot of legs there. And again, the bets that we're placing and the investments that we're making is to make that even more approachable to really just, someone who would otherwise maybe just make a Facebook page for their business, like make it approachable for that person.
What has you then most excited when you think about, the next year for Extendify, and then perhaps a little bit longer term, right? Like what does success mean to you in the context of this? What is the impact that you're hoping to have here?
So our goal is definitely to be that onboarding and site building experience for, essentially most websites in the world coming online. We want to just keep working with hosts and really represent a massive chunk of those websites coming online. But what's really cool about that is, I alluded earlier to the fact that we use this term onboarding internally, but it's kind of like a narrow definition of what we do. Because once we onboard a user into WordPress, then our goal is to keep guiding them along that journey to know what the next most important thing is that they're supposed to be doing. That might be setting up WooCommerce, which is an e-commerce solution for WordPress. It might be setting up an SEO plugin so that their search engine optimization is kind of really dialed in. Could be lots of different things. And that gives us an opportunity also to recommend other products and other solutions that are going to make them successful. So, for example, let's say that you had the domain layoftheland.net or something, and we saw through our partners that layoftheland.com was available. And we knew from statistics of some of our users that that would likely increase your traffic by 11%. That is then something that we can offer to you that is probably the most impactful thing you could do in terms of growing your traffic. And that could really be anything. We could be offering products. It could be services. If we think that you would benefit from working with someone to customize your abandoned cart follow-ups or something like that. There's a lot that we could do there. And that's where we get really excited about. We want to get users started, but we also want to be there to help them really grow and build that website, build that digital experience. And I think that that's where we really become this trusted partner for the web host as well. And it's something that we've seen there's demand for, even through, we set up a newsletter for web hosts that covers like what are the most important things for a WordPress host, not for WordPress users, not for WordPress agencies, for WordPress hosts, like what do they need to know? And people just give us amazing feedback about that. And all these things, I think, give us an opportunity to be this trusted partner for WordPress hosts so that when they have a question, when they want to launch a new product, when they want to grow, they come to us, we work with them on that and help them productize that.
So one of the things that I always loved and was surprised about the WordPress ecosystem, having built a few WordPress sites in my time, is really the extensiveness of the ecosystem, right? The plugin library and just anything that I've ever needed to do functionally, someone has already thought of that and then built the plugin and it exists. How much, across the WordPress ecosystem are you guys plugged into, collaboration, and is that part of the, the diagnosis of where people are experiencing friction and how you can, recommend, certain offerings to them that already exist is just, the ecosystem map.
It is huge. Yeah. So the WordPress.org directory of plugins right now has right around 60,000 plugins. And so plugins you can think of as essentially like apps. So like for your phone, you download an app to do something, to track your workouts or to, send emails. And so there are these apps or plugins for WordPress. And it's such a kind of cool resource for users to, just like you described, they have a problem, they look it up, they, hey, I want to really easily integrate Google Analytics onto my site. They look it up, there's a plugin that will do it for you. Install it, set it up, great. And most of them are free, some of them have paid upgrades, and it's a really cool resource. The problem is, of those 60,000, maybe 50,000 aren't supported. They were built by someone as a hobby. There's this dynamic where if you want some functional components that you install on, for example, all of your own websites, you could manually move it to all your websites, or you could actually submit it as a plugin to the WordPress directory of plugins. And then on each of your sites, you can just install it from the directory as opposed to moving it around yourself. So really, you just created that plugin for yourself. You put it in the directory for yourself. And then for one reason or another, it caught fire and now thousands of people use it. But you're not supporting it. You're not answering support questions. You're not updating it when the new version of WordPress is released. But none of those users know that. They have no idea, beyond seeing how many installations there are, whether this is like a real product or not. One of the things that we're focused on, so we do know all the major plugin developers. And one of the things that we're focused on is when we recommend functional components, making sure that these are real companies building real products. And so when we think about onboarding a user, it's not just about kind of pretty designs. I mean, we don't let people make ugly websites. So like it is about websites that look at, but it's not just about pretty designs. It's really about functional websites. And what that means in practice is a goal-oriented onboarding where a user tells us what are the jobs to be done, what are they trying to accomplish with their website, and based on that, we will install functional components like plugins. So as an example, someone might want to send out a newsletter. They don't know that if they want a newsletter, they need a form to collect emails. Then they need some sort of CRM, some sort of database to hold those emails, manage them, manage unsubscribes, all that kind of stuff. And then they need some sort of email sending to actually send out those emails. We don't want our users to have to know that. They tell us they want a newsletter. Awesome. We set everything up for them. They can have a newsletter. And we think that's really important. And as part of that, we vet those plugins. We make sure that what we pre-install, what we recommend for users is really solid. And we leverage that directory of 60,000 plugins, but just a small fraction of it that we think is really kind of up to par with the quality level that we think is necessary.
I really love that from a kind of a product management approach of essentially productizing jobs to be done,
yes.
which is this product management framework into your product. That right. is awesome.
Yeah, it's one of those things where when we tell people about it, like everyone kind of gets it immediately, but no one else in the ecosystem does it as a starting point. And so we found it's almost like this like product market fit in and of itself when we share that with hosting partners, et cetera. It's like, oh, awesome. I'm glad you're doing it that way.
Right. Yeah. Because no one wants to learn how to do the use all the tools to piece it together. They just want to do the thing that they're trying to accomplish.
Exactly. Yeah. SEO is the perfect example of that. Most people don't even know what SEO stands for, search engine optimization, but everyone wants it. Like who doesn't want their website to be found through Google, right? And so that's a piece where we're just like, okay, yeah, let's just take care of that for the user. Let's not ask them if they want an SEO plugin.
Right. And no one needs to necessarily know all the things that go into making that work on the back end.
Yeah, exactly.
So earlier on, you as part of the starting of Extendify, you mentioned, there's value just in and of itself starting something. And, I'm curious in the reflections of building this company so far, what are some of those takeaways that you have about, I think we can go in a few directions here, but, just high level takeaways from, company building and startups. And we could touch on, I think, that you have built a remote organization, before that idea was kind of, introduced, I think, holistically to people, and just, thoughts around, I think what a lot of people are struggling with a little bit today is, how do you develop culture, in a remote environment and avoid somewhat of the transactional nature of how it feels to interact solely online, and what culture looks like for you at Extendify and what's important there.
Yeah. So kind of the first part of that around kind of learning from entrepreneurship and such, there's a large number of learnings around the operations side of starting and growing a company that have been interesting. I've learned a lot. It's not something that I would seek to do again in and of itself, right? There are things related to accounting and legal stuff and setting up whatever unemployment insurance in some states that has like a really clunky system. There's just things like that are like, okay, I get it now. I might have to do it again in the future if I start another company, but it's not, that's one's enough there. And I think that's also why, so many people go out and start a Gusto or whatever other company because they realize how hard.
Right. Well, it's the parallel is like, what's the failure rate for startups, right? Like, exactly. Where are people giving up? And that's
exactly right. Yeah.
There's way too much logistical overhead.
That's exactly right. And so, but then in terms of some of the learnings that I've really appreciated are, I think this is kind of all of it just sounds so obvious when it's said out loud, but I think it's still so different when you experience it, is it really just figuring out scalable, repeatable customer acquisition is such a journey and such a challenge. And there's so many ways to approach it, to think about it, to test it. Some tests you run have really short turnaround cycles. And so right away if it works. Some things, especially when you're doing direct sales, sales cycles can be super long. You don't know if something's working for months. Just the customer acquisition part of it, I think, is so fascinating, and it's been such like an ongoing project and will forever be an ongoing project. And I've really enjoyed it much more than maybe I expected to. I've always been kind of a product guy, and I've always thought, hey, we built some cool stuff. Like it'll be, obviously I'm very aware of the common problem of, build it and they will come doesn't usually work, right? But nonetheless, the product side of it is so tangible in some ways, and it's just like fun to work on and to iterate and run A/B tests and whatever. It's cool. Like you just you can imagine it, you can do it, whatever. the growth, the user acquisition, the sales, all that stuff, I think is so interesting, and you learn so much from talking to people, and it really changes the way you think about business. I think in particular for people who work at big companies, like I have, companies of 15, 20,000 people, is you kind of take for granted that like people buy your stuff all the time, right? Like there's just like revenue that comes in the door, and you just like take for granted that tomorrow people are going to also come in and buy stuff. But there is this massive inertia that like allowed that to be true. And when you're a startup and like you get your first sale, like, there's no guarantee you're getting a second sale the next day. And it may have been just a total fluke. Someone may have misclicked but accidentally bought something, right? Like you have no idea. And I think like really getting a sense of that so much goes into the distribution equation, and how that looks going from 0 to 1, I think is fascinating. And I've enjoyed that. I think I'll always enjoy that. Around the team and culture building side of things, I think that distributed is always going to be different. I think team meetups are critically important. It's harder when you have a global team, but that's what we have. And so that's just kind of how we think about it. Is we get the team together. We're getting most of the team together in Germany in a couple months, and I'm really looking forward to that. And most of that time is hanging out. It's not work. It's not like, certainly not hands on keyboard, but it's also not even a lot of like whiteboarding or whatever. A lot of it's just kind of hanging out. But I also think that we've made, to some extent, a decision that we're not going to try to force an in-office culture without an office. So we're not going to have an online chess league. I know it's like a silly idea, but whatever. We're not going to do something because we can't have an in-person softball league, right? Like we're not we're not just going to try to replicate it. And like, let's come in, like everyone just like works really well together. Everyone enjoys, like we have a team meeting. Everyone enjoys kind of like spending time together in that way. But we're not going to force something just because that's what we've done historically while we're in person. And I think as long as people are aware of that, hey, we're not being like negligent here just because we don't care about culture. It's just like we're aware of the limitations of not seeing each other. We don't have a lot of meetings. Like that's huge for us. We communicate asynchronously, let people have a ton of flexibility as to when they work. And we just lean into it rather than think of it as like a limitation. We just think like that's one of our strengths. People work wherever. And I think that's a decision you have to make, which is also why in the distributed work world, I think pretty much everyone agrees distributed works, in-person works, hybrid is a nightmare. I probably don't even have to sort of like, describe the issues with it, but just it creates so many interpersonal issues, so many collaboration issues that I think that's something we'll never consider. We'll never consider opening up like a R&D or sales or whatever office somewhere. We'll always just keep everything distributed.
Yeah, no, it's very fascinating because obviously it was forced on so many, and there really, to my knowledge, like there weren't too many who were really doing it from the onset, but beforehand intentionally. And I think it was you had this like I think your colleagues at Village Global, you had this insight into what the future was going to look like.
And I'll tell you though that I am not one of these purists that thinks I will never go into an office again. Mm-hmm. I think again for me, if the best way for me to do the thing that I want to do is to go into some office because there's a team locally doing some really cool stuff or whatever, I think that's totally reasonable, and I think it is a path that I would consider. I mean, I love the flexibility of working from home, and it's mind-boggling to me, having lived this way for many years now, that if I want to go to the gym in the middle of the day or go to the park for a walk or something like that, like I just do it. And then there are so many people that in jobs where there's really no reasonable limitations why they can't do it, culturally they can't do it. So yes. I'm very much aware of that. But nonetheless, I think there are some things, people are doing really cool things in offices, and I think that's totally fair.
Well, it's in line with your, I don't know if you call it a philosophy, but that, even just entrepreneurship was it the right means to the end that you have? So that checks out. there's a consistency in your philosophy.
That's right. Yeah, trying to.
Cool. Well, I'll as we kind of work towards wrapping it here, I don't know. I'll leave just greenfield space here if there's anything that you think is really important that we haven't touched on yet, and then we can bring it to our traditional closing question.
No, I think we pretty much covered it. I'm glad that we got to chat for a minute about the customer acquisition side of things. It's something, I've had the opportunity on a few occasions to go and chat with some of the students at Case Western, for example, and the thing that I try to hammer home there when I look at these people, are 20 years old plus or minus, starting out in this career of hey, like there's some like real like fundamental things about, you want to grow a business, you need people to pay for stuff, and like how do you get those people? And I think that's such like a missed opportunity often to break it down to these like basic components of starting and running a business that have really become a kind of like a key theme for me as well. So I'm glad we got to chat about that for a minute.
Yeah, it is. It's always it's the things like you said that when you say them out loud, they sound very simple, but you need to bring revenue in the door for the business to work.
Yeah.
And how involved are you personally still in sales? And like, how do you view your role and responsibilities as leading the organization and how that maybe changes over the stages of the company?
Yeah, it's definitely evolved a lot. I try to have 100% of my time now on kind of sales or partnerships. I get distracted by things and get pulled away to do other things. But if I could spend all day, every day, just talking to the hosting ecosystem, I would. And, we're getting to the point now where we have some of our partners are so excited about Extendify that they're now pitching Extendify to their friends who also run hosting businesses. So that's like this amazing spot to be in.
Yeah, that sounds like right where you want to be.
Yeah, I just got some like WhatsApp messages last week that one of our partners was at a dinner and was just selling another host really hard on working with Extendify. So that's amazing, right? Like that's like a really cool place to be. But yeah, if I could do sales all day every day, I would. And my co-founder is really focused on product, on kind of this next iteration of these experiences that we're building. And obviously we're, as co-founders, we're working super closely on all this stuff together and dropping in on meetings when it's helpful and just, talking all the time. But that's the division of responsibilities today.
Cool. Well, we'll bring it back here to Cleveland to wrap it up. I'll ask you the traditional closing question here. But no, I even just before we get that, I think it's fun talking to you about how you've gone about it as well, because it is a little, I don't know what it's just a little bit different, I think, than a lot of the mindset of company building that I think people maybe historically have had here. And I think it's a good example for people to be aware of, particularly as the nature of things changes as well.
It's funny when you say that. I even reflect on the fact that I'm sometimes not totally aware of what company building in Cleveland has looked like. I know you and I chatted a few weeks ago, and we were talking about the idea that even though I have a company in theory based in Cleveland, I'm the only one here, I can happily work from home. I could build $1 billion business here and not know a single person in Cleveland. Yeah. And there is this element of, and I think still it's definitely on me as well, an opportunity to get to know the entrepreneurial ecosystem more. And certainly if anyone listening here wants to chat, I'm always open to connecting with people. But yeah, there's an element of, how have other companies been built here? Like, I don't actually know. There's some folks that I know, the Scout RFP guys, like just some people that I just know from kind of like personal experiences. But in terms of moving back to Cleveland and running a company here, I might as well be in Alaska, and it would in a lot of ways would be no different.
Yeah. Well, and again, I don't know if there is a prescriptive right model, but I think the more anyone can be aware of like what the possible paths are to figuring it out, I think the better it is to have that perspective.
Agreed.
Cool. All right, I will ask Lee, ask you the closing question here, which is for not necessarily your favorite thing in Cleveland, but for something that other folks may not know about, a hidden gem, if you will.
So I inevitably end up thinking about this way too much in advance of chatting, just because I've heard your podcast so many times and I'm well aware of it. And so anyway, I'll give it more of a philosophical and more of a practical answer to this. Or I don't know if philosophical is the right word. The sort of like slightly more philosophical one is, since coming back, I've really loved Case Western as a place to hang out, even if you have nothing to do with the organization, with the institution. Like, I feel like it's one of those things, like, it's certainly not a hidden gem in the sense of everyone knows it's here. But I feel like if you have no business to be there, if you're not a student, if you're not teaching there, whatever, people don't go there. People don't go to Case and like hang out. And there is something that I think is so energizing about a university campus. And I think Case's campus is a really cool kind of mix of sort of like urban, but still relatively secluded, at least on some of the quads, that I just love going down there, grabbing coffee, meeting up with someone to walk around or something like that. Like I think the energy that it brings is fantastic, and it's really been a cool place for me to visit as often as I can and catch up with some of the people that I know there. And I recommend that to anyone, even if you have no real good reason to be there. Just go like hang out and be on a college campus again, and I think you'll really appreciate the energy. Just one other, one of the things that I really missed from after leaving San Francisco was sort of some elements of the outdoorsiness. Actually, Cleveland is quite outdoorsy with the metro parks and all that, but some elements of that. And I ended up finding this climbing gym on the east side in Shaker Heights where I live called Shaker Rocks. And it just reminds me of a lot of the energy of San Francisco. Just the people there are like, take the time to slow down and are, I think, just generally folks who care about their community, care about the ecosystem, care about nature, right? These are people who love, climbing outdoors, etc. It's been this really cool microcosm of I think folks who or sort of type of community, type of people that I've missed from San Francisco, and I've really enjoyed spending as much time there as I can, sneaking out for a lunch climb when I can manage it. So anyway, there are two. I cheated. I gave two answers, but
the more the better. At some point I'm gonna have to pull together a map of all of them and put them on there, and I should do that at some point. Please do. I'll use Extendify to make that website.
Good.
Awesome. Well, Arthur, I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time. It's a really cool story, and really excited about the work you're doing. It's a big, ambitious undertaking.
Yeah, thanks for having me. After having heard many of these, it's always really cool to actually have the opportunity to join. So appreciate you making time for me.
Absolutely. If folks had anything they did want to follow up with you about, what would be the best way for them to do so?
So my work email is always great. My name can be confusing to spell, although I'm sure in the show title or notes that'll be apparent, but it's just my first name, Artur @extendify.com, or Twitter, my first name, and then Grabo is my Twitter username. You can reach me there as well. But yeah, always happy to chat with people. If someone wants to reach out, just let me know.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. So if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm, or find us on Twitter @podlayoftheland or @sternhefe, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with the Up Company LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.